It only took 7 seconds. Now, it's not a long time, is it? 7 seconds. But it established one man's legacy for a lifetime, and I'm pretty sure beyond. If you think you know who this is, raise your hands. It's kind of like I can name that that tune in half a note. That's all right. More clues coming. It was January 10th, 1982. If you think you know, don't call it out. Just raise your hand. No, not yet. NFC Championship. No. Oh, I see one hand. No. Oh, 3 hands, 4 hands. Oh, the guys have it. With less than 1 minute to play. What? Yes. It was the NFC Championship. Get this, Tava, okay? You're not a catcher, though. Less than 1 minute to play, and it was in the very back of the end zone. Joe Montana didn't even see it. He threw his, desperation pass, and in the very back of the end zone, it was the catch. And who caught it? I knew you would know this. Dwight Clark. And June 4th, Kelly Clark texted the world to let us know that her husband, Dwight Clark, had passed away at age 61 to ALS. And he had only been diagnosed with that for the last 2 years. Took him very quickly. And yes, he suspects that the head injuries he suffered over as a professional football player is related to that, as is very, very much suspected. Dwight Clark, 7 seconds, and his legacy was established. His leap into fame not only saved the game that day, but it launched the 49ers into the Super Bowl, which was the first of 4 that they would win over the next 10 years. And so the catch established what we now consider the 49er dynasty. It was a big catch. Not to mention it really crushed the Dallas Cowboys. Yes! You know where my bias is. But here's what Dwight said about that catch. And if you've ever heard him talk on some of these sports shows, he was a very, very deep, interesting man. But he said it's humbling, really. I feel honored people are still talking about it. Yes, they are. They're still buying his jersey number, right? It's great to give 49er fans that moment they can relive over and over and over. And they do, right? They do. It's one of the biggest of the selling posters that you can get for the 49ers. Nobody ever forgets it. And it's striking to me how humble Dwight Clark has always been, that this was not only a team, but a fan event. It wasn't all about him. It wasn't all about him. And the funny thing is, that 7-second catch didn't even exhaust his contributions in his career. He was, of course, a Pro Bowl, and he set pretty much all of the team records until the great Jerry Rice there came along, and Terrell Owens later. But he was always very humble, and those who know his career know that he came out of Clemson without anybody really expecting much except his college coach and Bill Walsh. But when they paired him up with Joe Montana, boom, he blossomed. There was a flower in the bud that Bill Walsh could see. And he told people, this one's going to be great. And yet, even that doesn't exhaust his legacy. Those who knew him best say that his generosity and his humility and his kindness and his charisma were really, really the legacy that Dwight Clark has left behind. So let me just ask those of you who remember these things, did any of you have a dad who, had one moment that stood out in his life and will never be forgotten? One event or one accomplishment or one thing that happened? Anybody? No? That your dad was known for, will always be known for, Fran?
Certainly within the family. He said his greatest accomplishment was being arrested in Selma, Alabama.
Oh, yes, how wonderful. Fran is saying that her dad would say his greatest accomplishment was being arrested in Selma, Alabama. Can I guess what decade? Yeah. Oh, that tells me a lot about you, Fran. Thank you for sharing that. Anyone else? Yes, Marion.
After a long service as a school board member, there was a school named after my father.
Wow. After long service as a school board member, a school was named after Marion Shepherd's father. Wonderful, wonderful. Anyone else? Yes, Kyle.
I just remember my dad a lot because he was a hard worker. He was a security guard for over 30-some years,
That's a long time. He was a caretaker then, a security guard. Anyone else have yes, Carolyn?
Surviving occupied Norway in World War II and escaping to Sweden.
Say that again?
He was in occupied Norway.
Yes, yes. Carolyn's father was living in occupied, Nazi-occupied, right, Norway, and escaped to, was it Sweden? Sweden. He will always be remembered. What courage! Can you imagine? What courage. So let's thank God for those super dads. Well, Dwight Clark, I think, will always be associated with the catch, right? Even though that doesn't exhaust his legacy in sports. But I hope that there are people who will also remember Megan Vogel for what she did. Anybody know her name? Probably not. Let me tell you what she did that was so memorable. Well, Megan was running, you'll like this story, Stephen. Megan was running in the Ohio State High School Championships in 2012. And she ran and won the 1,600 meter. Is there a 1,600 meter, Stephen? Yeah, okay, that was it. Because I saw it in a couple different ways. 1,600 meter race, and she won. Now get this, less than an hour later, she took on the 3,200 meter race. And as you might guess, it was too much for her. And in the last 50 meters or so, she began to falter. But ahead of her in the race was Arden McGrath, and Arden had already fallen 3 times. And the 4th time she fell, Megan was coming up behind her. And instead of passing her by, Megan bent down, lifted her up, put her arm around her own neck, and together they hobbled to the finish line. And when they got to the finish line, Megan made sure that she moved her body behind Arden so Megan would come in last and not Arden. How about that? High school track. Not some great moment of sporting accomplishment, but great sportswomanship, certainly. But you know what? I think it was even more than that, because it wasn't about fairness. Megan's gift was a gift of sacrificial kindness, wasn't it? She went above and beyond even sportswomanship, if you ask me. And I wish more people would remember Megan. That wasn't that long ago. But I think she has established, at least in those in her circle and her state, a legacy of sacrificial kindness in sports and perhaps even in life. Now, this letter that Brother Dave read to us from James, most of us remember this passage that speaks to us about temptation. But when we think of temptation, where do we go? We always think, oh, it's something immoral, right? It's something like that. But remember, this is James, who most people remember this epistle as being about works, right? That a faith that's true also is evidenced by what you do with that life of faith. So remembering that, James moves seamlessly from talking about how we are tempted to gifts and the giving of gifts. All too often I hear those two, it's all the same paragraph, the same passage, but they tend to be separated. But James means them to go together. And what he's talking about is the temptation not to commit gifts. It's not about committing sins of commission, but of sins of omission. The sin of not giving gifts. And he wants us to understand that when we give generously, it's coming from God, not just from you. It's coming through you from God. Think about that. The temptation not to give the gifts God gives us to give. There's what we call in Christianity fruitful giving. Because fruitful giving is about a future gift. It's a different kind of legacy than what we just heard of a particular moment of opportunity or even the recognition of an immediate need that we can meet. Fruitful giving is about future giving. It's about seeing, Archie, that flower inside the bud and decades of apples in an apple seed. That's what fruitful giving is about. I've always been moved by this ancient Chinese proverb. Nobody can quite find it, but it seems to have made it to ancient Greece and eventually to us. But it speaks of old men who plant trees under whose shade they will never rest and whose fruit they will never taste. Let that sink in. Do you hear fruitful giving? Fruitful giving. That's the Christian call to legacy. To give generously in ways that we will not even experience. It's not even for us. It's those whose hearts see the flower in the bud. That giving, that kind of giving. The legacy of fruitful living is the legacy of fruitful giving. That's what James wants us to see. And yes, it's a sin of omission when we fail to have that vision in our hearts and to act on it as a work of our faith, to know what could happen, what could be done, and yet not give toward that future. A couple weeks ago, I was, I don't know what I was doing. I must have been walking around the building or something, but I was coming up from this direction, and as I approached the office door where I was going to go in, I found a man there, and like he either had just rung the bell or was going to ring the bell, and I said, hello, so he could know I was behind him. I said, hello, can I help you? And he turned around, and I could see immediately that his face was very kind of concerned. And he looked at me, and he said, are you from this church? And I said, yes. I said, I'm the pastor, and I introduced myself. And he said, did you know Sue Wilcox? This was just a couple weeks ago. And I said, yes, I did. And he said, did you know that she suffered a stroke? I said, yes. And she was in convalescence. I said, yes, I went down to see her. And he said, and did you know that her son died while she was there? I said, yes. And he just kept going. And he said, and did you know that she had a fall then and broke her hip? And I said, yes. And I was thinking to myself many things. I was thinking one thing. I think he knows Sue better than a lot of people here at Centennial. He said, I know she went to church here. And I said, yes. The Sunday night service, I said, yes, that was the Journey. Sue was a big fan of the Journey. And she was very disappointed when we ended that service. She was kind of the usher, the greeter, and I would say the registrar, because she made sure she had the name and phone number of everybody. And as I was in this kind of little bit awkward conversation, I was really feeling his deep sense of loss for her. And I kind of wondered how or why so much time had passed, but he was coming to this church now to connect with her. And I realized as we were talking that I was experiencing Sue Wilcox's legacy. She loved Centennial. She loved the life she shared with us here, even though most people of 1030 didn't share it with her, just the people in the evening. And I was giving thanks to God afterward for her legacy that went beyond us, obviously. That her life had touched others and was meaningful and precious to others. And I thought, what a precious moment to share with this neighbor. His name was Mr. Thomas. Sue Wilcox has blessed all of us with her legacy of generous, fruitful giving. I'm trying to remember how long ago it was, maybe about a year ago, I think, that we were given a notice that Centennial would receive a gift from her estate. And we have received that gift. And that gift was, I think, was it 35, Fran? 31? $31,000. She remembered us. She gave for a future here at Centennial that she would not share with us. That's the legacy of fruitful giving. And so on this wonderful day of celebration, as you give thanks to fathers who have been generous in their giving, and for Dwight Clark and Megan Vogel and Sue Wilcox, give thanks for those who give the gifts that God gives them to give, and give generously as God gives to us.